Hello and welcome to another episode of Seven Story Podcast. I'm Natasha Kyler and I'm here with today's featured poet, Dobias. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a poet. I wrote the poetry collection Alive. It released last year. I also have a background in theater arts, so I'm a bit of a multidisciplinary artist. I model, I work in content creation, so whatever, you name it, I'm doing it.
That's so cool. You said you also model and do content creation. How do you balance finding the time to write and amongst all the other things you do?
Yeah, so for me, writing, sometimes I set aside time specifically, and other times it's just I write when I'm inspired to. So that can be that there's a certain theme that I am wanting to kind of explore at the time, or sometimes literally just a line of poetry will come and I'll just open my notes app and write it down and either explore it then if I have the time or come back later. So it kind of really depends. But yeah, it's definitely something that is important enough to me that I find the time to do it, or it finds time to enter my life.
I understand what you mean. And can you tell us a little bit about your collection, Alive?
Yeah, so I wrote it over the course of 2 years. It explores themes of love, grief, and self identity. I talk about a relationship that I was in and just navigating that and finding my way through that, finding myself and my footing as an individual, as a woman in her 20s. There are quite a few poems that just talk about womanhood and my experience in that. And so it was written kind of as a self portrait of myself, but also with these themes that I think a lot of us tend to encounter over the course of our lives, which is why it's called Alive, and just sort of a meditation on all these things that we go through and whether we're experiencing something positive or negative, finding the beauty in all of it.
Wow, that's beautiful. I feel like self-portraits in poetry are so personal and so vulnerable because it's your innermost thoughts, it's your deepest, darkest secrets, it's all of your feelings out on a page. And so, how do you feel putting so much of yourself out there within this collection?
Yeah, I love that question. Definitely, of all the genres, I think poetry is the most vulnerable because it's your life, obviously, that you're writing about. What I love about it, though, too, is I think with that, you're still able to choose how much you share, right? Because you can talk about a relationship or a personal experience and kind of tell it through the framing of a metaphor. Or what I try to do because of my artist background is I would make myself sort of into these characters to talk about relationship dynamics or to talk about myself as a person. So I have a poem that I embodied Portia from The Merchant of Venice and sort of use that as a way, a creative way of talking about a relationship dynamic. So I think as much as it's personal and it comes from that really real space, I definitely have poems that, yes, are more literal, and then those that are through an artistic lens, and that's more kind of focused on the emotion that was driving it. So yeah, definitely I had moments where you always have those moments of self doubt, I think, no matter what you're writing, of how is this going to be perceived? And oh my gosh, this is a little bit scary that I'm putting myself out there like this. But I think, too, because I come from a performance and art background, I'm very used to sharing myself with the world or audience in different ways. And so I think that I've always kind of, there's the performer side of me and that personal side of me that have always sort of blended. So it kind of came natural in that sense.
That's very interesting. I would love to know a little bit more about how you put yourself into those characters, how you come up with what characters you use. Like, do you create any from scratch? I know you said you use Portia for one. So, have you developed any from scratch before?
I guess in a sense, yes, through metaphor. I have another poem in the book called Message in the Bottle. And in that, because also I love period dramas, I sort of was imagining being this like woman on like the cliffs in England, like sending this message to her love. And so it was, talking about these real emotions I was having and this kind of breakdown in communication of a relationship, but in this sort of whimsical way. So I guess I sort of invented a character in that sense, since it wasn't such a literal poem.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also used Joan of Arc as another device. I know this sounds really funny. As another device to talk about myself as a woman and a woman in love, and drawing parallels of like using the historical figure of Joan of Arc, and a woman who used her intuition and her belief in herself, and she fought for her country of France, and that was like her love, and the way that I felt like I was fighting for my love, and sort of, in that poem, I feel like that's sort of like me and Joan are hand in hand, where I went back and forth with a stanza referencing her in history, and then referencing me, and how I was able to kind of use that in metaphor. That was the poem that took me the longest to write. I literally worked on that one for months. It's also, I think, maybe a 3 or 4 page poem in the book, but I was proud of that one because I felt like it's poetic, but it's also giving you this narrative. And I just thought that, I wanted to be as creative as I could in my writing, that what I was writing, even though maybe I was talking through these themes that we can all talk about, right? Falling in love and heartbreak. But, how many people can do it in a way where it's like Joan of Arc is a metaphor? I don't think many people would think to use that as a metaphor, to be honest. But, again, like, I think that that's kind of my signature on that piece, and what you sort of find in my book is I wanted to find the most creative way I could into these poems.
And so how did that like idea come to you? Like were you like, I want to use a character, or was it just this is something that would be interesting, I want to try it?
Yeah. So that one specifically came as so it came because it was a nickname I had, was Joan, from someone, because they were like, oh yeah, like, because I wanted to be a period drama actress with my theater background, and they were like, oh, you kind of have a resemblance to Joan of Arc, and you sort of embody this in this way. So I was like, awesome, I'm gonna now use that to write an entire poem about this dynamic and these feelings. And so yeah, so it did have those personal roots that, again, no one would know unless you were personally in my life, but that's kind of where that sprang from. And then, yeah, I just have this personal interest in history as well. So I was like, let's explore it. Let's see if it works. And then there were enough creative ways and parallels to my real life and to her story that it just sort of fit. And it was the same thing with the portrait poem, was that I went to the Met Museum in New York, and there's a famous painting of her, of an actress who played her in the show. And I was reading the little placard, and so much about her character and her story, again, related to things in my personal life. And I was like, wow, I really think that I could, find my way into this poem and draw these parallels, and it be, again, a creative way of telling this story. So I feel like those characters kind of found me in a way. Like, it wasn't that I set about trying to find them, or I'm like, oh, this is, I'm going to write all these historic women, or all these like character women. It sort of just naturally evolved, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. I would have never thought to do that. And so that sounds like a fun little prompt I want to try out now. um, what do you hope readers will take away from your collection?
I think so. My intention with writing the book, it came from, like I said, a very personal place. Um, Poetry and writing has always been a way that I think I've been able to process my life. And so I began writing at a time where I had a lot of different things going on, a lot of very big emotions I was experiencing. And there were moments where I felt really alone in those feelings, or I was being really self critical about feeling certain ways. And so by writing, it gave me a way to process and to heal all those things. But then I kind of realized, well, as much as I feel alone in this right now, I know that this isn't a unique experience. Other people have definitely felt this before. So I felt really confident in the writing. I was really proud of it. And I had previously begun sharing my writing with my friends, and they gave me really great feedback. And so I decided, maybe there's merit to this. Maybe other people will also find something in this. And I think I have always been, like I said, I've always been an artist. So I also wanted to use this as a way to kind of introduce myself with a self-directed project. So that's kind of what this came to be. But the original intention was that maybe it would help you see yourself in my story and know that you weren't alone. So I think the takeaway is seeing me work through these different stories and these different emotions and this emotional arc that I take you through in the book. You'll know that no matter what you're going through, even if you're at a low period, there is the other side of that. And, you know, you can at least while you're reading the book, feel like you're walking hand in hand with me through my journey. And hopefully it gives you that same courage in your own life and that same um, just a reference of like, well, if she made it through these things, so can I. And maybe there's a one line that inspires you or that one takeaway, and maybe you decide to write about something in the book that inspires you and it helps with your own healing journey. So I think that that's kind of what I hope, that it can be a source of inspiration or comfort, in however way that looks for you.
I feel like a lot of poets that I talk to, they say that they want others to feel seen and heard through their collections, and you definitely echoed that. And while you were explaining that, I kept thinking of the phrase grow through what you go through. And I feel like that's very much on par with what you were saying about there's the other side of it and you can come out of it.
Exactly. And I think too, the book was a way for me to feel like I could connect with the audience. I think, we live in a digital age. There's so much noise, there's so much content that we can consume. And it's funny because, you can feel like, oh, you can be connected to all these people. You scroll on Instagram, you scroll on TikTok, but yet there is sort of a lack of connection as well. And so I think I wanted the book to be something that, I opened myself up vulnerably so that instead of getting just that perfect, curated feed or image of myself, it sort of was a peek behind the curtain of, yes, there have been times that I haven't felt okay, but I've made peace with that. And if you're there too, that's also okay. So like, I wanted to be able to forge that true connection amidst, I feel like, all the noise and all of the being, inundated by stories and content as we are on social media.
And that's so important, building a true community and having that real connection outside of the digital realm is so important and something that we're lacking a lot as a society. So it's really great that you decided to do that. You saw that gap and you decided to do something about it.
Thank you.
Um, they say that the best writers are profound readers. So, do you mostly read within your genre of poetry? I know you said you're really into like historical pieces. So, do you read that? And if so, what are some of your recommendations?
Yes, I definitely gravitate towards a lot of poetry. I have always just loved quotes in general and just been gravitated towards that. And a lot of those have come from poetry books. So I would say predominantly over like the last 2 years, and also because I was working on my book, I was connecting with more poets as well. So I was just reading a lot of poetry. That's kind of what was in my field. But yeah, I also love books based in history, historical nonfiction. I read this book quite a while ago, but it stuck with me because I thought it was such an interesting story. And I'm blanking on the name of the author, but the book is The Devil in the White City. And it was about the Chicago World's Fair and a serial killer who was operating around the fairgrounds. And the author did a really interesting way of combining those two timelines of the history of the fair coming together and learning all about that, and then what was happening with the serial killer, which was really kind of terrifying, but also really interesting. And I think that was like an interesting, I think the world fairs in general throughout history are such an interesting concept to me of bringing together all these cultures and at that time, how that was being perceived as well. And how obviously I think that would have changed the perception now. So that was a read that I definitely would recommend. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the author. But again, yeah, that was a book that really stuck with me. I thought was really cool. Talking about, again, like interesting ways into a story and combining those different characterizations.
It's very interesting. I'm gonna look into it. Not necessarily my go-to genre, but I'm trying to expand. So
It's
definitely,
a little nerdy history, but yeah, it's
definitely
interesting.
gonna check it out though. Um, Shifting into your experience as a writer, what does a typical day look like for you? I know you said you model and you do other things. So what does that look like?
Yeah. So I do. a host of different things, like I said. So writing is right now something I make the time for, and I've been promoting my book. As I said, it released last year in October, so I've been in the process of trying to expand the reach of that, and beginning now to work on some new projects, and again, just exploring what I feel like I want to dive into now. Um, I work in social media, content creation, so I do a lot of that. And then, yeah, I make room for my other creative hobbies. Another thing that I do every week is I kickbox. So I go to a local gym and I train in kickboxing, which is a really good physical outlet for me. And that's kind of what I do weekly. So it's, a mix of work, my own creative projects, and then going to the gym and staying active.
That's so cool. I also work in social media and content creation, so I resonate with that. And then it's so funny because there's a kickboxing gym not too far that I've been like looking at. So I think you've just inspired me to actually go in and check it out.
You definitely should. I think, as a tangent, kickboxing for women, amazing. You feel so incredible and just badass, and I would recommend it to anyone. It's awesome.
Definitely gonna check it out now. I know you mentioned like you'll pull out your phone and just type out a line if it's in your head. Do you typically write on your phone or on your laptop, or do you prefer like pencil to paper?
A little bit of both. So if I'm out and about, it's my phone. But I have a lot of journals. I moved them; they're not currently on my desk, but I literally had a stack of like four different ones because I have different journals for different things. And I do prefer pen and paper. So what I'll do is, like, if I do write a poem or jot down a couple notes in my notes app, then I'll transfer them to my journal just because I like to have everything in one place. I have a bookshelf. It's not in the back of this frame, but over that way. That is just the top shelf is just all the journals I've kept since middle school, which is really cool. So it's this log of my life. But yeah, so I definitely am a pen and paper girl, and I love a good journal.
I want to be a pen and paper girl really badly, but my phone is just so much more convenient. And once I just put everything on digitally, I'm like, okay, might as well just keep it here.
Yeah. I mean, it's good because it's all backed up. That's the thing. It's like if I lose the journal, whoops. So I try to stay organized, but yeah, I like the tactileness of the pen and paper.
Yeah, I've been getting back into like handwriting things. I'm like, this is so great, but I have so many journals and I have so much stuff like scattered throughout. So it's amazing that you can stay organized because I can't.
I try my best. My desk does have phases of getting very messy where there's like a half written poem over here and three open journals and another book in my laptop. And I'm like, there's something happening here. I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but proof of life. Here we go.
Very much proof of life, proof that I am a creative and I'm a writer.
Yeah, exactly.
um, what's your process for completing a poem? From idea to maybe outline to editing? Walk me through that.
So I think it definitely varies. I have had poems that have come to me in one sitting where just full thing, I read it and I was like, all right, I'm happy with that, no edits. And then I've had the experience of it'll be one line that comes to me and I'm like, oh, this is so good. I want to expand on this. And then I have to figure out how to either maybe fit it into something I already wrote that is similar or it becomes its own thing. So if I'm working on a longer piece, like the piece about Joan of Arc that I mentioned before, that kind of that was literally an outline. That was like a lot of different pages, a lot of different. Okay, this is Joan and the metaphor here, and this is me, and this is how I'm making the correlation. And it kind of, that meme with the board. I forget what show it's from, where he has the big board with all the pins and the paper, and he looks really crazy. That's kind of what that looked like. And so that's kind of like, in that sense, sometimes I'll have like a stanza and then sort of I'll either like write where I want to go with it and then work myself through finding those lines. And in that sense, I lost my train of thought there. um,
Take your time.
yeah. Wow. Okay. I don't know where I was going with that. I got literally, my brain became that bored. Um, oh, that's what I wanted to say. I'm back. Um, in that sense, sometimes I can visualize the poem sort of in the way that a painter might be looking at a canvas, right? Of, okay, you're looking at your full image and where you want to go with it. And there's this blank corner over here, and you're like, okay, I want to add more color over here, more design over here. And it sort of kind of comes along that way of, I'll see the visual of what I'm trying to write and the metaphors coming together. And it sort of kind of reaches a point where I can take a step back and be very satisfied with it and read it through. I also like to read all my poems through or like record myself reading them. And that kind of helps me decide if it's done or maybe, I want to edit something or maybe it needs like one more thought in there. Um, so yeah, so again, like the process clearly varies. Sometimes I'm the maniac with the board, and other times it just pleasantly comes when I open my journal. So yeah, it is a, a wide process there, but yeah, that's kind of how I work.
I'm always interested to hear what other poets' process is because normally, like, if I have an outline, I'm like, yeah, it's gonna go this way, this way, this way, and then it'll do something completely different in the middle, and I'm like, well, the rest of it can't work the way I want it to, and the poem just kind of takes a life of its own. So I'm always curious to hear how that works for other people.
Yeah, I definitely think that poetry is um, that form that in excuse me here, but alive. It's alive in the sense of, I think that it does tend to tell you where it wants to go. You kind of get that base, like, starting line or idea, and then sometimes, surprise yourself with what it actually turns into. You sit down to write the one poem, and then suddenly you have a different poem that you didn't intend. And that's happened to me before too. So it's fun in that way. Or on the flip side, incredibly frustrating. So you really have
Did
to love it.
you do? Was that this like? Did you come across that in your collection Alive at all?
So Alive was interesting because when I decided that I wanted to write a book, I was just writing. And there wasn't really a rhyme and reason to what I was writing. It was just like I had said earlier, like a time of my life where there was just so much going on. So there was so much to write about. So I just kept writing whatever I felt like I needed to. And then I reached a natural stopping point. And then I kind of had to look at everything, choose the poems I thought might be good for the book, and be like, okay, so how are we actually going to make this book? Like, how am I going to make all of these things that could look very scattered into something cohesive? And so what I did with that is I took the poems I thought I wanted to include, separated those into separate categories. And then once I had some categories, I was like, okay, I'm kind of seeing an arc. And then I literally printed everything out too, because I wanted to have it in my hands. Then I reordered those, and then in a way that I thought kind of told a narrative arc. And then I looked for where there were kind of like holes in that story, and then what I might want to write after that, to kind of make the whole thing more cohesive. And there were definitely moments where I was like, okay, I started with, I think I need to write a poem about this, or I want to write a poem about this. And I wrote an entire poem, and I was like, nope, I'm going to scrap that. Like, I'm going to take this one line, or I'm going to take this one idea, and actually I'm going to go and I'm going to write this other thing. So like the Joan poem I mentioned earlier, that was an entirely different poem that I had been working on. And I was like, you know what? This is not reading the way that I want. But okay, Joan of Arc, okay, that's interesting. Okay, I think that I can say what I'm trying to say in this poem, but in this Joan poem, and it's going to be so much stronger. So yes, that was a long-winded answer for yeah, sometimes it happens like that as well.
Yeah. What is your favorite thing about being a writer?
Connecting with other people. I think it is the coolest thing now that the book is out too, that people who bought the book, I've had people reach out to me and say, oh, this really resonated with me, or this is how this made me feel. Um, or pulled out certain lines. That's also really cool too, like if I'm in the room with the person and they're reading something and they'll pull out like a certain line, and it's really cool to see what people resonate with. But just the fact that people are resonating with it at all and telling me about it is incredible, because I think so much of being a writer, it is a very solitary process. You're in your room or coffee shop or wherever, and you're writing manuscript that's existed in your head for so long, and you don't always get to see the reaction that it's gonna produce when it's actually out in the world. So I think when I do get to hear that, and to see those reactions, it's just really cool. And it makes me really happy and really giddy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you like that? Thank you.
You mentioned the solitude part is kind of difficult. Is that what you find to be most difficult as a writer, or is there something else?
I think the most difficult thing for me is, like I said before, when I am in that space of I know that I want to write something, but it's just not flowing. The words aren't coming, or there's like a certain feeling or experience I want to convey, but it's just I'm having a hard time articulating it in the way that I want. That's really frustrating. And then also, like we said at the beginning, poetry and it being inherently vulnerable. I think sometimes getting to that space of true vulnerability or emotional honesty can be difficult, right? Because you have you have your own voice that's critiquing and in the poem, and then you have the thought about, well, oh, how is this going to be perceived, right? And so it's hard sometimes not to self censor in those instances. And so I think that that kind of can be difficult, and I definitely encountered that in my book as well, of like there were certain things I wanted to write about, and then I started thinking of too much outside of myself, of like, oh, like what are people going to think about this? And it was only after I kind of put that to the side that I was able to write what I wanted to, and get it to the level that I wanted it to be at. And so yeah, that's difficult. And I think that that always exists when you're writing, but especially when you're writing something that is about your life and so personal.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Balancing that vulnerability, like we mentioned earlier, is very difficult because it's how much of myself do I want to show the world and what do I want to keep for me. So finding that balance is always very tricky. Sometimes you're like, I could be a little bit more vulnerable, and sometimes you're like, I said entirely too much. Um, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to take this time to give you the floor and talk about where people can find Alive and where people can find you and anything that you might be working on that you want to share.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm really active on Instagram. My Instagram is at Dobias, and then I have in my bio I have a link tree where I have a link to my website, and on my website I have different places that you can buy the book. You can buy it on Amazon. It's available Barnes and Noble. Any online retailer really is going to stock it because of the way that I publish. I have the direct Amazon link on there as well. If you wanted to buy direct from me, I've also had people do that. So I don't have anything set up directly for that at the moment, but you can always reach out to me through my Instagram DMs, or my website contact page, which is www.dobias.com. And I will respond and we can work something out for that. And yeah, I'm also on Goodreads. That is also linked in my Instagram bio. And that is kind of where you can find me, I'd say. Instagram is definitely the best place. I did a lot of my promotional work for my book on there, a lot of really cool videos that I worked on to promote the book, some little short films that kind of will give you more of the vibe of the book and what to expect. So that, I would say, is the best place to find me. And yeah, if you just Google my name, I come up as well. So pretty easy to find.
Awesome. That's amazing. That's it for this episode of Seven Story Podcast. Thank you, Cara Tobias, for joining us and sharing your story. Check out her book, Alive. And until next time, I'm Natasha from Seven Story Podcast.
Bye. Thank you.